reading from the 15th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Luke. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in desolate living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am, dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called out one of the servants and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Oh, your brother has come home, and your father's killed the fatted calf because he's got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. But his father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours.' But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and is found." The Gospel of the Lord. Thank you. Be seated. Pastor, thank you for the invitation to be here today. Sandra, as always, thank you for your exquisite playing of the service. It's always a good place to be in this church, this good and loving church, and to worship here. Thank you for allowing me to do that on a regular basis. You have no idea how much I need this pit stop in my weekly routine. Thank you for that gift. Every 3 years, the people unknown to me who created what we call the lectionary, the cycle of readings in the church, they're on a 3-year cycle. You may have noticed that. Every 3 years we hear the same text about the same time of the year. It's not by accident. You have an A, B, and a C cycle. Well, some folks way back when decided that in the C cycle of the year, we had to hear the parable of the prodigal son during the season of Lent. And it so happens that this coming Lord's Day is that Sunday. this parable of the prodigal son, this story which German theologian Helmut Thielicke called the waiting father, is like a gorgeous diamond in the treasure chest of the church. And every 3 years when preachers go to that treasure chest and they open up the chest, and there are all the great jewels of texts from the Bible, there is this one hope diamond of a text that we call the parable of the prodigal son. And so the preacher very carefully lifts the diamond up and he holds it up to the sun and he turns it just a little bit and he says, "What is here that I've not seen before?" Well, we know the story, don't you? We all know the story. The young, petulant, rambunctious, wild son comes to the father and says, "Father, give me my portion of the estate. I'm getting out of here. I've had enough of this." And so he gets his third of the estate. The father legally dies. In their culture, when the father divided his estate, the father legally died at that moment. He gave 2/3 to the older boy who stayed. He gave 1/3 to the younger boy who took it and left. And no sooner does he leave the safety of that place, he squanders all that he has in what the Bible calls wanton or desolate living. Gambling, prostitutes, drinking. We know all those things that we've imagined he did all the time away. And then he spends everything he has. He realizes he has nothing, but he has to eat. So he hires himself out to a pig farmer, the lowest of the lowest menial jobs that a Jewish boy could ever expect to have. And there in that pigsty, we are told that he comes to himself. He reconfigures his ego. He has awakened in him homing instincts. He realizes that the slaves in his father's house are faring far better than he is, and so he does what common sense would think he needed to do. He decides, I need to go home. So there in that pigsty, he starts writing this speech. It's really a nice speech. It's really one of the finer little speeches in the Bible. He says, "I will arise, I'll go to my father, I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven, against you, I'm no longer worthy to be your son. Make me one of your slaves, make me one of your hired servants." And he gets up out of that pigsty and he starts walking toward home. And if you'll sometime take the text, just kind of walk with the speech. I'll rise, I'll go to my father, I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against. You can just kind of walk with that. And then the facet of the diamond beams. While he was far off, his father saw him. While he was far off, his father saw him. He ran to him. He threw his arms around him. And in that moment, the boy in the embrace of his father, smelling of slop and manure and dressed in rags, the father clothed in elegance, begins to hear the well-rehearsed speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But he can't go on. The father interrupts the speech. It is so powerful. The father stops the speech. He turns and he says, "Quick! Bring a robe and put it on his shoulders. Put sandals on his feet. Put a ring on his finger. Kill the fatted calf. Well, this son of mine was lost, and he's found. He was dead, he's alive." And they began to make merry. But it is that little glittering phrase that has me this morning. While he was far off, the Father saw him. How far is the gaze of God? How far is is the gaze of God? Well, there's some people in the church who think God can't see any further than that back pew back there. That's about as far as God can see. And we show up several times, sometimes in some traditions, often during the week, hopefully on Sundays. We show up in this what someone has called a God box. We show up in the sanctuary where we worship, and we know that God sees us there. How far is the gaze of God? Well, it's about as far as that last pew, because this is where I need to come for God to see me. But then there are other people who will say, no, they're the anti-church group, and they have good reasons, Pastor, these days to cast a jaundiced eye at the church. We won't go there. But these folks will say, answer the question, how far is the gaze of God? And they are fixed on their foibles, their sins, their misdeeds. I'm not good enough. Because you see, all God sees is what's wrong with me. That's what God sees. That's as far as God's gaze is. It's looking at what's disconnected, what's broken. And I don't think I want to deal with that. But that's not what the story says, is it? How far is the gaze of God?